bookstores are my absolute favorite places in the whole world, and responsible for a few of the greatest changes and moments of my life. I have met the love of my life in a bookstore. I know it sounds so corny, but it's true. And to prove it, I brought him here with me. He's sitting over there, and this is actually our anniversary today. He deserves the applause. He's a long-suffering, very long-suffering partner. And we met at a bookstore. And I met at the same bookstore my Israeli publisher, this guy, who is one of my best friends. So we actually imported the whole team. We came here. And that bookstore was a magical place. And I feel the same energy and the same vibe here. And I remember that feeling that you get when you enter like one of these magical bookstores for the first time, and the books speak to you, and you also can speak, you can also hear them talk amongst themselves, and you have this feeling that when your back is turned, they go like, you see that girl over there? What do you think she likes? And then one of them just, you know, a little bit like moves, or really gently, so to make himself known to you when you're perusing. Something is alive in a really good bookstore. And I felt the same vibe here, and I came here before to like scout the place before I came. And I felt at home immediately. So I'm really, really happy that my book lives here now. And a part of me is always going to be here. So it's really special for me that it's not only a publishing house, but also a store that houses this place. And a store that so many weird and wonderful things happened in, right? Am I right? Aleister Crowley once made all the books here disappear and then apparently reappear. Or else you had to like buy a lot of inventory since then. The book has a lot of love of books in it. So I think it's a good way to connect with a store, to have it live here. And the whole process of the translation into English was very special for me, and I was blessed to work with the Watkins amazing team, with Fiona, which I'm meeting now for the first time, and it was an honor and a privilege to work with you. Thank you.
Well, back at you. You're amazing.
It was incredible. You're such a professional team, and I really felt that you loved the book and understood it and were happy about it as I was. And
Absolutely.
It was a great thrill. And it made me work very hard because I knew everything in Hebrew, but then I had to rethink everything in a different language and do some more research and find out some more cool stuff. So it was a lot of work, it was a lot of fun, and I'm very happy to be here right now. And I'm willing and able. Okay, I'm willing. I don't know if I'm able to answer any questions you may have.
How did it start? Like, what was like? Did you collect the information first and then make a book of it? Did you suddenly have an idea that you were going to? You know, how did it? What came?
I'm like the really annoying aunt that you really don't want to get seated by at a dinner party, because she constantly, you know, drills on about things that she thinks are cool. And she goes, did you know that witches in the 17th century were depicted as having not cats for pets, but bats? And you're like, oh God, please, somebody save me, pass the wine. I'm that person. And I've always been that person. And for me, having a column in the newspaper, which is how this book started, was like this amazing opportunity to bother people who I don't know personally and cannot alienate me, and get paid very little money for it, but still some, and do all the research I wanted to do with the backing of the newspaper. So I started writing these columns, and they all had leads to other subjects. I was researching one thing and then finding out something else, and I was going like, oh, but this is really, really interesting. And I have like the attention of a cat. Like I doing research on one thing and then, oh, wow, no, this is more interesting and I want to know about this one. And so I would always like put a pin in it and then next week just go a different route. And eventually they all crossed somehow, but the information here was gathered over a decade. I mean, it took 10 years to...
Was it when you started to notice the links between things?
Yeah.
Because that's what really comes out of the book, is
Yeah.
the fact that it's a web of knowledge. And it's almost like you're a one-woman Wikipedia. We have to think of a different name for it.
Oh, wow.
Noapedia or
That's
something.
the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. I think, hopefully, I still remember most of this stuff because sometimes you read something and it just, goes in through one ear and then out of the other. But the English version also allowed a lot of the stuff to grow different roots. I mean, go to other places because we actually didn't take all the chapters from the Hebrew version. We took about 2/3, I think. So I had to open up the net to dismantle the web that was originally there and retie it, like to reweave it. So I found new connections and other things that I thought were really neat. So there are new side notes that were not there in the Hebrew version because I found out more stuff. And basically, if you guys haven't given me a deadline, I would just go on forever. I would just, no, this is too interesting, and I wanted to delve more into this, and then that. I need to have restraints. So.
Do you think for the people that haven't read the book yet, maybe you should tell them a little bit about the kind of ideas that you've got in there and
I was hoping to avoid that question because I really don't know how to. No, you're perfectly right that I should maybe explain what the book is about. But it's difficult to, it's hard to describe.
You can talk about witches.
I can always talk about witches, but it's an attempt to delineate some of the evolutionary paths of popular culture, to look at phenomena in popular culture that are very common nowadays in the media and literature and film and television, and try and understand how they started out, what was their voyage throughout history, and why did they change the way they changed? What kind of evolutionary pressures were put on them to undergo these weird and wonderful metamorphoses that they have undergone. For instance, witches. I was just at a really interesting exhibition at the British Museum. It's called Feminine Power. It was amazing to see so many of the objects that I've only read about and seen pictures of in real life. The amazing watercolor of Waterhouse of Circe that I've only seen pictures of, and suddenly to see it, right in front of me. And all these fabulous, sorceresses were once goddesses. And not just goddesses, but goddesses of war and of fate. And they determined the fate of not only men, but gods themselves. And there are 3 of them, 3 goddesses of fate. In the Greek mythology, in the Celtic mythology, they're called the Morrigan. They used to fly over battlefields like ravens and collect the souls of the dead. And there in the Norn, there are 3 goddesses of destiny in the Norse mythology. So there are 3 of them. So what happens to these very powerful female deities this triad of female power when another triad comes to town, which is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So we have this trio against this trio. One of them is going to have to leave town. Okay? So when Christianity introduces itself into these pagan spaces, these goddesses have to find another way to exist, and they turn into witches. They turn into the three witches in Macbeth, for instance. So we have all these really weird and fantastic transformations and metamorphoses of these beings, ideas, concepts that we see throughout our history until they end up here, until they end up with this woman protester that I saw a picture of holding up a plaque that says, "We are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn." So we started off as these trio of goddesses, and we end up as female activists protesting patriarchy. So what a wonderful voyage this is. And I wanted to know more about that, so I wrote about it. And then I discovered that while female, let's say, well, okay, older women with less friends and maybe too many cats were hounded during the Renaissance as witches and burned at the stake. The men were not safe because the men were hunted as werewolves approximately the same time. So you could pick and choose. If you're a woman, you could be persecuted as a witch, and if you're a man, you could be persecuted as a werewolf. There were huge werewolf trials, approximately at the same time. So it was like no one was safe. If you had a cat, you were a witch. If you liked dogs, you were a werewolf. It was, not very safe to have a cat or a dog or a pet of any kind during that time. So these are the kind of things that I try to, pull in and knit in the book, alongside unicorns and mermaids. Vampires, a lot of vampires. A lot of Nazis, for some reason. There was a point where I was, doing the proofreading on the book, and I told my husband, the whole book is just Nazis and sex. There's a lot of sex and Nazis in this book. So yes, a lot of Nazis and sex. And vampires and witches and the weird and the wonderful. The short and the long of it is.
For those who have two options, what would you recommend as a first read? The English or the Hebrew? And why? Because I guess the language is also a layer in this net, so I don't know, or maybe not.
Ooh, that is such an amazing question.
And what was cut?
The question was, what would I, if you could read the book in English or Hebrew, what should you choose and why?
And what was cut? I would add to it.
Sorry?
What was cut out of the...
What was cut?
Yes.
Then you could say.
It has a lot to do with the language. Some of the chapters that we didn't include were very Jewish. Very Jewish not only in the subject matter that they discuss, but also in the language I used and the sources I used. And there's not a lot of canonical translation of certain Hebrew texts that I use in the book. And they don't carry the same kind of cultural resonance in English as they do in Hebrew. So in Hebrew, I could, I come from, as Ethan mentioned, a religious family. And these texts have really deep resonance for me, and also I think for a lot of Hebrew readers. And when I try to shift them, they didn't sound the same. So a lot of the chapters that were cut were very, a lot of Jewish sources or Jewish texts. That was one of the reasons. A lot of the chapters that were cut had quotes from Hebrew books or Hebrew. There was a whole chapter on lullabies and the really subversive way that they operate, where they have sometimes really harsh words. Like the text is difficult. I mean, rockabye baby. When the tree breaks, the cradle will rock. The tree breaks and the baby falls down. And it's really, really harsh language, but the music is so pleasant. And you rock the baby and you sing this really nice, quiet lullaby with horrible, horrible words, wishing horrible things on the little tiny baby. Oh my God! And the whole chapter is going through lullabies in Spanish, in Hebrew, in English, in French, in German. It's all alike. And the concept of the mother being able to release her aggression in the safety of the nursery with this really enchanting music, and the juxtaposition of the two is really fascinating to look into. But I couldn't translate it. It was untranslatable. So in certain aspects, I would recommend the Hebrew because it has more text than the English version. But I think that it was, for the first time for me, was possible to see, okay, wow, grammatically the sentence has absolutely no sense. I'm sorry about my English, but for me it was the first time I could see the book from outside when I reread it in English. And to see the way that my language works, that I use a lot of quotes and phrases from the Bible, from Hebrew writings, without even noticing it. And then in English I had to find replacements and to think about other resonance that I could discover. So I used a lot of Shakespeare because it has that ring that I wanted. But I had to like unravel everything and retie everything together again. So, I don't know. You should listen to the audiobook. The audiobook in English is really, really good. Really, no, it's amazing. I mean, the way to choose someone to do this is to find someone who sounds like you really wish you could sound yourself. And she does. She's great. She has this amazing British accent, which obviously I do not have. She sounds old and wise and warm and funny and everything really I wish I were. So you should really listen to the audiobook. It's amazing. Yeah.
Does it have a hopeful perspective in as much as it's
not bleak
and we're all doomed?
No. No.
Is it
No.
more of looking at the evolution of it and some hope at the perspective of how it has changed and how we're now recognising the myths. So it's all old wine in a new bottle, isn't it? A lot of it.
I'm sorry, the end of what you said?
Well, when you look back at myths, and you
Yeah.
go, oh goodness, it feels like you're drinking old wine, but from a new bottle as it
Yeah.
evolves in each manifestation,
Yeah.
generation's manifestation of it. Like we have superheroes now, and I think that's because children are looking for that transcendence that we found in the myths and the metaphors and the legends and the folklore.
Definitely. I think
So
it's like the new pantheon.
Exactly.
Marvel is the new pantheon, is the new Olympian gods.
Yeah.
And yeah, they really incorporated some of the actual Olympian gods. I mean, the last Thor movie had Zeus in it, right? And the comics brought a lot of these gods together, years before.
Yeah,
the book is very hopeful, except for one chapter maybe. It's trigger warning, and there's a chapter about nuclear waste. Who doesn't want to read about nuclear waste, right? It's like the most fascinating topic in the world. But it is. It unbelievably is fascinating and a little bleak. But apart from that, I think oddly for me, because I'm a pessimist, the book is very optimistic.
A great quote I heard about optimists invent the aeroplane, pessimists invent the parachute. So they're both useful, yeah.
Exactly.
What superheroes are mentioned in the book?
What superheroes are mentioned in the book? There is a whole chapter about Vikings and Nazis, which obviously features Thor. There are a few mentions of the Amazons. Therefore, I also speak about Wonder Woman. And I'm trying to remember what else is there. I think there are also a couple of the Egyptian gods that found themselves in comic books. I think it was Horus, if I'm not mistaken. But there are a few. Wolverine, of course. So a fair amount. But just to wrap my answer to you, I think that the evolutionary process that these ideas and beings go through is wondrous and fascinating and endless. They are survivors, these ideas and these icons, and they will persevere.
Before we move on, if you could just indulge me, that's really interesting that you should mention Wolverine. How did you link? Because I almost looked at Wolverine almost like a Pan or a Green Man type, because he can regenerate literally from just a remnant of him. So he's a nature archetype, a male nature archetype within which the overarching nature archetype is female. But is that how you represent him in the book?
I don't remember. You will have to read and find out.
But
Yes.
he's in both the Jewish and the Hebrew and the English one, is he? You didn't leave him out of the English one?
No.
Oh, good.
There's a whole
I hope.
chapter on...
Otherwise I'm going to have to learn Hebrew.
Yeah.
I think it's a perfect opportunity. The werewolf one. Yeah.
I wonder if you can tell us about the title, the English title, and the chain, the choice of word, or the order.
It's not a question I can answer because the title was suggested by my publisher. The Hebrew title can be roughly translated into the cultural network. And the element of the network was really important for me. If anyone looked inside the book, you've noticed, as someone mentioned to me, you forgot to do accept changes because of the comments. So it's important for me to have this sense of connectivity. So this is why we did the cover the way we did, with all these, links. But we had a lot of problems with the naming of the book, and then Ethan suggested, I think, The Life Fantastic. And I fell in love with the name immediately without even knowing why. It was love at first sight. It felt right.
Is it a play on words of The Life Fantastic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm a Pratchett fan, so it also, everything fell very neatly together. But yeah.
Is there, during your extensive research and while you were putting everything together, is there something that really left you flabbergasted and you felt this is a revelation, or I never imagined this?
I think only once a day when I was working on it. And it was there's so many twists and turns. And things really connected, and I would, my poor husband, I would rush out of the room, and I was like, oh my God, did you know that Tycho Brahe, the astronomer, had a duel over mathematics when he was 21 and lost his nose and was wearing a prosthetic nose for the rest of his life made out of gold? What? I did not know that. I did not know that he had a pet moose that he once killed because he gave him beer to drink. And that he died after refusing to excuse himself to go to the lavatory because he thought it was not polite. And he was waiting too long. He caused some internal damage and died a few days later. Although some people thought that Johannes Kepler poisoned him, and they exhumed his body a few years ago to look for poison, and they found a lot of lead. So it's possible. Johannes Kepler discovered the orbit of Mars and was a murderer.
Whole new light to the
So
faith again.
every day was like this. I was like, how is history like this? Full of these stories. Why didn't anyone tell me about this when I was going to school? You know, I would have loved it. So I put everything in the book. So every day was like,
a lot of jumping moments.
yes.
It's like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, what's happened to her now?
Yes, and the book is a little bit like that. I mean, it's jumpy. I've heard complaints, but I've also heard these complaints from people just having conversations with me. So, you know, it's a lot like talking to me, the book is.
I've got a question. So we morph from witches and wolverines into the lost city of Atlantis.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about how that came about, and it's mythical what you're talking about, or?
Well, we first hear about Atlantis as something that happened many years before the tale begins. It's hearsay. The Greeks, you know, it appears first, if I'm not mistaken, with Plato, and he claims that he heard it from another guy who heard it from an Egyptian guy, and the Egyptian guy heard it from another guy. It's like this whole hearsay about this lost mythical place. And it was intended at the beginning as a cautionary tale. They were a great civilization, but they did not worship Zeus as they were supposed to, and therefore they got smote. He smote them, he smit them, he, you know, finished them off. They all, this grand civilization was consumed by the wave. And it's possible that they were actually recording a massive earthquake and eruption of a volcano that happened in that area where Santorini is today. So it's possible there's some kind of cultural memory of this catastrophe, a little bit like the flood stories that resonate some kind of climate catastrophe. Probably, we don't really know. And Atlantis, well, she goes back beneath the waves for a really long time, and then it's drudged up by a lot of Helena Blavatsky. Am I pronouncing the name right? Yeah? Blavatsky. And her followers, who believe that the root races of mankind, some of them are from Atlantis. And the Aryan race actually is from Atlantis. And I might be skipping a few, you know, stepping stones on the way, but you know, it's like 6 degrees to Nazis, this whole book. I'm sorry. But, you know, be forewarned. They lurk in unexpected places, like Atlantis. Because not all of them, but there were a lot of people in the party that were fascinated with the occult. There was a whole group called the Ananalbe. The Ananalbe was consumed by this research of the occult, and they were trying to fuse magic and science together to somehow breathe new life into alchemy, in a way, and meld the two together. But when you take science and you take magic and you try and use ideology as a medium to bring them together, horrible, horrible things happen. More horrible than are depicted in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade or the Lost Ark. But you can have you can see a lot of the echoes of this in popular culture. So they believed that they were the master race, and they came from Atlantis, via Atlantis. And this gave them the right to, do all the horrible things that they did. Not all of them, but some of them had held this belief. So this is how Atlantis finds its way into this. And one of the things that I liked about this chapter, if you talked about the superheroes that are in the book, one of them is in this chapter, which is Aquaman. Aquaman is the son of Atlantis. His mother was the queen of Atlantis, and his father was a mortal man. And his first appearance in comics is fighting the Germans. He's fighting German submarines. And this was before America joined World War II. Because the artists who created Aquaman, like the artists that created a lot of superheroes at the beginning, were Jews. And they wanted America to join the war. And this was their way to fight Hitler while America was still deliberating and trying to figure out if she wanted to join the fight. They were already in the front lines. Captain America punching Hitler in the face, and Aquaman capturing German U-boats. So this is how Atlantis was recaptured, repatriated, inhabited by Jews, taken back from the Nazis, and these super Jews are fighting back.
Is it a story, or is it a fact that the cape was actually the talit?
Yeah.
So it's brilliant, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is actually not a lot of people. I don't think anybody knows him outside of Israel, but there was actually a Hebrew superhero that had like these bindings on his hand that feeling and was using them like Wonder Woman uses her bracelets, and he had this beam coming out of his, a lot of kinky stuff. Had a really bondage look to it, but yes.
Was there a voyage that was your favorite?
Sorry?
Was there like a voyage that was your favorite?
In the book?
Yeah.
I think vampires. Because they go through such a glamification. They start out, they're so like these ugly, creepy graveyard dwellers. And then they become Byronic. And then they become sexy. And then they become really emu, shiny Mormon versions in Twilight. And like so many transformations that it was like it was a real roller coaster to just hang on to these caped toothy guys and see which turns they take and where they stop and where they pop up in unexpected places. So this was one of my favorite chapters to write. And also the aforementioned nuclear waste chapter, which again I say is fascinating. Really, it's not just about who takes out the trash. It's about language and about memory and about time, and it's sad and it's beloved of me.
Maybe if you elaborate a bit.
No, I want it. No, it's a teaser.
Because it's my favorite chapter.
It's a teaser.
Really?
I want him to look it up.
Okay, look it up.
I was picturing Homer Simpson working in the nuclear power plant. That's all I can picture.
Okay, okay. I can see that.
Okay, I'll say one thing about it.
Okay, thank you.
How do we leave a message that would still be understood in 10,000 years? What do we do? what language do you use? I mean, we could use English, but my English is not so good. Yours is great. Can you read Beowulf in the original version of it and like understand all of it? Because it's almost Norman Saxon English, right? I think 5,000 years is as longest as the oldest still living language, which is Chinese. We're talking 10,000 years. So we can't use language because we don't know what's going to happen to it, how it's going to change. We can't use signs because signs also lose their meaning and have totally different meanings over time. When you saw a skull in pictures of the Middle Ages, it does not necessarily try to warn you about anything. It's there to remind you that there's a lot of times a skull at the base of the cross. It's to remind you that Jesus was a descendant of Adam. It's Adam's skull sitting there at the base of the cross. Or it's there to remind you that you're a mortal man. But it's not there to warn you against drinking from this bottle. So I don't know if we can use signs. Signs are tricky. Signs lose their meaning and acquire new meanings. So no language and no signs. So what do we do?
Pictures, caves, stone.
Pictures also have...
Interpretations.
They're one of the solutions that someone offered that I'm describing in the book is a little comic strip. It shows what happens to you if you open a case that has nuclear waste in it. So there's a smiling guy. He's walking up to this cask. It has a cross, a skull and crossbones on it, and he opens it. And then the smile drops from his face, and he's sitting down, and he looks very, very sad, and then he dies. It works great if you're a person who knows that you're supposed to read it from left to right and not the other way around, because if it's the other way around, then it's the fountain of youth. He was feeling horrible, and then he opened this cask that has this symbol on it, and now he's all smiling and everything is great. So this is really important stuff, because this is the world that we're leaving to our children and our children's children. And it's just a really fascinating conundrum to think about. And there were some really crazy solutions suggested. One of them involving mutant cats. And one of them involving artificial moons. And many more queer and strange suggestions that I will say no more about. So you can read about them in the book if you like. Yeah.
Information that you can condense. Maybe I like the comic strip idea, but I think we could do that with on a flash drive with video.
A flash drive, what do
A flash drive?
Well, again, like with any language or with it, we hope that they will have the technology to be able to access previous technology. Or just like, you know, I think you're right, there's no perfect. I think you would have a real hard time finding the perfect medium for a civilization 10,000 years in the future to be able to decrypt a message that you read through.
There was a very big convention in the States, and they invited science fiction writers, semioticians, archaeologists, graphic designers. Who else was there? A few other really weird professions to have a brainstorming, session about this thing. They got the guy who did the Voyager, the Pioneer disc to come, and he suggested the comic strip idea. So this really makes me wonder if aliens are ever going to get here, because if that's the message that they got, I don't know if they really had any chance of deciphering it.
Maybe we should tell people what that disc is. I'm not sure everyone knows.
It's a golden disc, and it has a figure of a man and a woman, very crudely pictured on it, and a few equations, a few equations.
And I think our location in the Milky Way.
Our location in the Milky Way, relevant to.
If you kind of want to shoot us, so here we are.
So there are a lot of assumptions that went into this thing.
This was sent out.
It was sent sent with a probe far into space, in the hopes that someone finds it, is knowledgeable enough to decipher it, and after figuring out what it means, still wants to come here. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but that was the Pioneer disc, and they got the guy to come and help them with the nuclear waste problem.
And there's a whole chapter about aliens as well. Right?
Sorry?
There's a whole section about aliens in the book as well.
Yes.
You mentioned.
A lot of alien abductions and alien probes for some reason. It's always involving some kind of probing mechanism or device. Aliens are very fascinated by human reproductive system, apparently, if they do exist. It's a very interesting example of mass hysteria and the way it creates very similar reports among very distant and seemingly unrelated people that all start depicting aliens as short, gray, large-eyed individuals at the same time for some reason. And how it began, the couple that was the first to report an alien abduction, it was in the 60s in the States. They claimed to be taken and probed and then returned a few hours later. And it started this whole conspiracy theory with Roswell as the place where the American government is hiding the alien spaceship. And they signed a treaty with these aliens. It's called the Granada Treaty, in which they give us forbidden technology and we give them human beings to pretty silly aliens who are willing to exchange technology for unimaginable strange experiments. But hey, so this is how we got stealth technology, by the way. Probing. Yeah. So there's also, as you said, a chapter about aliens and many more. But I couldn't go on, literally all day. And then they will have no reason to read the book.
Simpsons has been said to be very prophetic, and there's a great line from Homer when he's abducted. And he goes, okay, he takes his trousers down, and the aliens look distastefully at him and say, look, we've reached the limits of what anal probing can teach us. Please do your trousers up.
Oh, God.
Simpsons are big this evening.
Yeah.
Seems that one more thing. I've got one more question.
Yeah.
What's your wish for us to take away from this book when we read it?
The sheer joy of this really weird and wacky culture that we inhabit. How resilient it is. How flexible. It's amazing to me every time I discover something new about these things that interest me. And it really, it gave me a lot of joy. So I hope that it somehow transfers to whoever chooses to read it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I figured I had to look pretty because this was my book launch, right? So this is what you do. I don't know the city well enough. So I found myself walking into the most expensive of department stores to get my makeup, as one does when he doesn't know the city. And I was sitting there and I was getting, all groomed up. And this guy tried to burst in with his scooter. And you're not supposed to let the scooter autonomous scooter inside the store or whatever. And she was like putting on my makeup, and she was looking at the guy trying to get into the store, and she was like going like this with the makeup. And then she said, oh, sorry, ma'am, sorry, I'll fix it in a minute. And I was like sitting there, I was like, dude, I have to, like, I came to this country for this event that's happening in 15 minutes. So like, and she's like, oh yes, sure. And she's trying to like fix everything. And then they call the police because he's trying to fight with the security guards. And there's like fighting going on in this really expensive and high-end department store, which I don't even remember the name of because I don't know. And then the police came and they said, okay, so who is witnessing this? And I was like, I saw nothing. I couldn't, because I was like, my eyes were cast downwards because she was putting on the mascara, and you're not allowed to look up because then you get mascara in your eyes, right? And he's like, did you see this? And I was like, no. It's like, ma'am, you're sitting right in front of the door. If anything happened in this room, you were a witness to it. And I was like, really, officer? אני לא מדברת אנגלית. לא מדבר. I don't know English at all. Please, just let me out. It's like, ma'am, can we see your passport? So they wrote down my passport, and they wrote down my number. I was like, guys, can you at least give me like some police escort to where I need to go because I'm late? And there are people that I really wanted to meet here. They refused. I have a really bad opinion of the police in this country now. I don't understand why I couldn't get a motorcade to drive me over here. But I did not. I had to, do my own way. So this was the story of why I was late. I'm very, very sorry. I hope now the police has my number. And, well, we'll see. We have to leave the country tomorrow. We'll see how this ends up. If we get allowed to board the plane.